My boss tried to fire me for being pregnant, so I made sure the whole company knew what kind of person she really was. I was 3 months pregnant when Sandra called me into her office. She'd been my supervisor for 2 years at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm where I'd clawed my way up from unpaid intern to senior account manager through pure determination, countless unpaid overtime hours, and the kind of relentless work ethic that had earned me a reputation as the department's most reliable closer. "Close the door and sit down immediately," she said without bothering to look up from her computer, her perfectly manicured fingers clicking across the keyboard with the mechanical precision of someone who valued efficiency over human decency. I settled into the uncomfortable chair across from her massive mahogany desk, assuming we were about to discuss the Henderson campaign I'd just successfully landed after 6 grueling months of client meetings, proposal revisions, and competitive presentations. Instead, she slid a thick manila folder across her desk with my full name printed in bold black letters across the tab, like evidence in a criminal case. "Your performance has been declining significantly over the past several months," she said in that ice-cold tone she typically reserved for employees she was planning to systematically destroy. "We're going to have to terminate your employment effective immediately." My heart literally stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air completely out of my lungs. "What are you talking about? I just landed 3 major new clients last month. The Henderson account alone brought in over $200,000 in revenue for this quarter, which puts me 15% above my annual target. Your productivity metrics are down 23% from last quarter according to our comprehensive employee tracking software. You're calling in sick more frequently than any other employee in the entire department. Missing critical project deadlines and failing to meet even the most basic performance expectations that we require from senior-level staff." She finally looked up at me with those cold, calculating gray eyes I'd grown to absolutely despise over the past few months. "And frankly, with your current condition, we need someone who can fully commit to their professional responsibilities without allowing personal distractions to affect their judgment and productivity." There it was. The real reason behind this ambush. She knew about my pregnancy. I'd only told HR the week before, carefully following company policy that required pregnancy disclosure by the end of the first trimester for insurance and accommodation purposes. I hadn't even started showing yet, just dealing with manageable morning sickness that had made me exactly 15 minutes late on precisely 2 occasions over the past 3 months. Hardly a pattern of chronic tardiness. "Sandra, you absolutely cannot fire someone for being pregnant. That's explicitly protected under federal employment law, specifically the Pregnancy Discrimination Act." She leaned back in her expensive leather chair and smiled that cold, predatory smile I'd watched her use to systematically destroy other talented women in our office over the years. The same smile she'd used when she'd pushed out Jennifer Martinez, Maria Santos, and Lisa Chen, all for the crime of having reproductive capabilities. "I'm not firing you for being pregnant, Jessica. That would be illegal, and I'm far too smart to expose the company to that kind of liability. I'm firing you for consistently poor performance and repeated failure to meet the departmental standards that every other employee manages to achieve without difficulty. All the documentation supporting this decision is right here in this comprehensive file." I flipped through the folder with trembling hands, my stomach churning with a volatile combination of pregnancy hormones and pure, unadulterated rage. Suddenly, every minor mistake from the entire past year had been meticulously recorded, deliberately twisted, and carefully presented as damning evidence of professional incompetence. Late email responses I'd never been formally warned about. A single client complaint from 8 months ago that had been resolved immediately and actually resulted in expanding our contract. Even my 2 sick days for morning sickness were listed as unexplained absences negatively affecting team productivity and overall departmental morale. Each entry was dated, timed, and cross-referenced with fabricated performance metrics that painted me as a lazy, unreliable employee who was barely competent enough to handle basic responsibilities. It was a masterpiece of systematic character assassination. "This is completely fabricated bullshit, and you know it," I said, my voice barely steady as I fought to maintain some semblance of professional composure. "It's all thoroughly documented fact, Jessica. I've been very carefully monitoring your performance for quite some time now, and the pattern of decline is undeniable." She stood up and smoothed her perfectly pressed designer blazer with obvious satisfaction, like a predator savoring the moment before the killing blow. "Clean out your desk by 5 o'clock today. Building security will personally escort you from the premises to ensure there are no incidents." Walking back to my cubicle in a complete daze, I felt like my entire carefully constructed world was crumbling around me in real time. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the office chatter too loud, everything slightly surreal, like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. I desperately needed this job for survival. My husband David and I had just bought our first house 6 months ago, stretching our finances to the absolute breaking point with the down payment, closing costs, and moving expenses. His middle school teacher salary alone wouldn't come close to covering our mortgage payments, car loan, student debt, and soon, the astronomical costs of raising a child. We'd be financially destroyed within 3 months, probably losing the house we'd worked so hard to buy. But as I sat at my desk staring at the empty cardboard box HR had thoughtfully provided for my personal belongings, something crucial clicked in my brain. A vivid memory of a conversation I'd accidentally overheard months earlier that had first planted seeds of deep suspicion about Sandra's true motives and systematic targeting of women. Sandra had absolutely no idea that for the past 6 months, I'd been quietly but methodically documenting her harassment, discrimination, and systematic campaign against every single woman in our department. And I had evidence that would not only save my career, but completely and permanently destroy hers. It all started with Jennifer Martinez, our former top account manager and the woman I'd replaced when she was forced out. Jennifer had been with Morrison & Associates for 5 years, consistently exceeding her sales targets by at least 35% annually. She was brilliant, dedicated, universally respected by clients, and had single-handedly landed some of our biggest accounts. Then she announced her pregnancy during a routine team meeting. I watched Sandra's entire demeanor toward Jennifer change overnight, like someone had flipped a switch in her brain from professional colleague to predatory hunter. Suddenly, Jennifer's innovative ideas in meetings were dismissed as unrealistic and poorly thought out. Her exceptional client relationship skills were criticized as lacking proper professional boundaries. Her legendary time management became a serious concern for overall departmental efficiency. That's when I started paying much closer attention during our weekly team meetings, secretly recording them on my phone's voice memo app whenever Sandra made suspicious comments. Her hostile remarks became increasingly obvious and legally problematic. Jennifer, are you absolutely sure you can handle the Morrison account? It requires extensive travel and long hours, and with your current situation, maybe someone with fewer distractions should take the lead. I'm genuinely concerned about your focus lately, Jennifer. Planning for a baby can be incredibly distracting from work responsibilities, and our clients deserve our complete attention. We need team members who can commit 100% of their energy to their professional obligations. No divided loyalties or competing priorities. When Jennifer went on her legally protected maternity leave, Sandra immediately reassigned all her major accounts to male colleagues, claiming they needed stability and continuity during her absence. She also restructured Jennifer's commission structure so that she'd lose money on deals she'd spent months developing before her leave. Jennifer returned from maternity leave to find her corner office moved to a windowless room next to the server closet, her workload cut in half, and her biggest clients already comfortable with their new account managers. She lasted exactly 3 weeks before she quit in frustration and desperation. During her exit interview, Jennifer mentioned Sandra's discriminatory treatment, but HR dismissed her concerns as typical adjustment difficulties after extended leave, and possible postpartum emotional sensitivity. That's when I realized Sandra had done this before, multiple times, and she was already planning to do it again. Next came Maria Santos, our rising star in digital marketing who had revolutionized our entire social media strategy. Maria had been fast-tracked for promotion to associate director after bringing in 5 major clients in her first year and increasing our online engagement by over 200%. Then she got engaged to her longtime boyfriend. Sandra's campaign against Maria was more subtle but equally devastating in its systematic cruelty. She started excluding Maria from important strategy meetings, then later criticizing her for being out of the loop on crucial developments. She reassigned Maria's biggest project, a comprehensive rebranding campaign she'd worked on for 8 months, to a less experienced male colleague, claiming Maria was too emotionally invested to maintain proper professional objectivity. During Maria's quarterly performance review, Sandra actually said, "I'm genuinely concerned that wedding planning is significantly affecting your professional judgment and priorities. Perhaps you should seriously consider what's really most important to you right now, your career or your personal life." Maria didn't get the promotion she'd earned and deserved. She accepted a position with our biggest competitor 2 weeks later, taking 3 major clients and our entire social media strategy with her. Then came Lisa Chen, our talented graphic design specialist who had been struggling with infertility for 3 years. When Lisa finally got pregnant, she was ecstatic, until she miscarried at 12 weeks. She took 2 days off to recover physically and emotionally from the traumatic loss. When she returned to work, pale and obviously still grieving, Sandra actually had the audacity to say, "Well, at least now you can focus on work again without all those personal distractions and emotional complications." Lisa broke down crying right there in the middle of the open office space, surrounded by shocked colleagues who couldn't believe what they'd just heard. Sandra immediately wrote her up for emotional instability and unprofessional behavior in the workplace that disrupts team productivity. I'd been systematically recording Sandra's comments during meetings, saving screenshots of her discriminatory emails, and keeping detailed written notes of every problematic interaction. I knew she was building carefully constructed cases against women to force them out before they could become what she called liability risks to departmental efficiency. But I needed more concrete, undeniable proof of her systematic discrimination. The breakthrough came during last month's management meeting. I'd arrived early to set up presentation materials and was working alone in the conference room when Sandra and our department head, Mike Rodriguez, walked in together, completely unaware that I was behind the large projection screen adjusting cables. "We need to be much more strategic about our hiring practices going forward," Sandra was saying in a conspiratorial tone. "Specifically, we should avoid hiring women of childbearing age entirely. They're simply too much of a financial liability with maternity leave costs, reduced productivity during pregnancy, and inevitable turnover when they prioritize family over career advancement. That's technically illegal, Sandra, Mike replied, though his tone suggested he was seriously considering the suggestion rather than rejecting it outright. Only if we're stupid about it, Sandra responded with confidence. It's perfectly legal if we find other legitimate reasons for our decisions. Performance issues, cultural fit problems, lack of long-term commitment to company goals. I've successfully managed out 4 potential risks over the past 2 years without generating a single discrimination complaint. My blood ran completely cold as I realized she was talking about Jennifer, Maria, Lisa, and one other woman I hadn't even known about. I kept recording, my hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. The key is meticulous documentation, Sandra continued, clearly proud of her systematic approach. You start building comprehensive cases early before they become problems. Every minor mistake gets recorded and filed. Every late arrival, every personal phone call, every sign of divided loyalty gets carefully documented. By the time they become pregnant or start talking about family planning, you already have a file thick enough to justify termination for cause. What about Jessica Parker? Mike asked. I heard through the grapevine that she might be pregnant soon. Already working on it, Sandra replied with obvious satisfaction. I've been building her file for months now. Give me 1 more quarter of documentation, and I'll have more than enough evidence to eliminate that particular risk to our department's efficiency. They were literally talking about me like I was a pest to be exterminated, a problem to be solved, a risk to be managed, rather than a human being with rights and dignity. That night, I went home and told David absolutely everything I'd discovered. He was furious and wanted to march into HR first thing in the morning, but I convinced him to wait and let me handle it strategically. HR had already failed Jennifer, Maria, and Lisa completely. I needed something much bigger and more public to ensure real consequences. Over the next month, I reached out to all the former female employees who'd been pushed out by Sandra's systematic discrimination. Jennifer put me in touch with 3 other women who'd experienced similar treatment over the past 5 years. All of them had kept their own documentation. All had similar stories of escalating harassment following pregnancy announcements or life changes. Maria still had access to company financial files through her new employer's partnership agreements with Morrison & Associates. She helped me compile comprehensive data showing how Sandra's discriminatory practices were costing the company millions in lost revenue, legal settlement payments, recruitment costs, and damaged client relationships. Lisa had accidentally been included on several management email threads discussing problem employees and had saved copies of Sandra's most damning communications. The emails were smoking gun evidence of systematic, premeditated discrimination based entirely on gender and reproductive status. But I needed the perfect moment and platform to expose everything publicly in a way that couldn't be dismissed, covered up, or swept under the corporate rug. That moment came when Sandra made the fatal mistake of illegally firing me. That night, I called an emergency meeting at my house with Jennifer, Maria, Lisa, and 2 other women Sandra had destroyed. We spent 6 hours compiling everything into a comprehensive, professionally formatted presentation that would destroy Sandra's career permanently. Audio recordings with timestamps and transcripts, email screenshots with full headers showing dates and recipients, financial impact analyses showing millions in losses directly attributable to Sandra's discrimination, documented patterns of harassment against pregnant women and mothers going back 5 years. We titled it, The Real Cost of Discrimination, How Sandra Walsh Has Systematically Destroyed Women's Careers at Morrison & Associates. The company's quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for the next morning. Every employee, all board members, and representatives from our 6 largest clients would be attending. Sandra was scheduled to present the department's annual Diversity and Inclusion Progress Report. The irony was absolutely perfect. I arrived at the office at 6 a.m., 2 hours before anyone else. My access card still worked. Sandra had been so arrogant and confident in her illegal termination that she hadn't bothered to revoke my building credentials yet. I accessed the main presentation system and carefully replaced Sandra's sanitized diversity report with our comprehensive exposé. I also sent copies of everything to the Department of Labor, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the State Attorney General's office, and my journalist friend Sarah, who specialized in workplace discrimination stories for a major news outlet. At 9 a.m. sharp, Sandra walked into the main conference room like she owned the entire building. She was wearing her signature power suit, the navy blue Armani that she claimed made her completely untouchable in any negotiation. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her confidence absolutely unshakable. The room was packed with 120 employees, 8 board members, and representatives from our 6 largest clients, including Mrs. Henderson herself, the account I'd just landed before being illegally fired. Good morning, everyone, Sandra began with her practiced corporate smile and authoritative tone. I'm excited to share our department's outstanding progress on diversity and inclusion initiatives over the past fiscal year. She clicked her presentation remote confidently, expecting to see her usual collection of sanitized statistics and meaningless corporate buzzwords. Instead, the massive screen displayed our title slide in bold letters, The Real Cost of Discrimination, How Sandra Walsh Has Systematically Destroyed Women's Careers at Morrison & Associates. Her face went completely white, then flushed red as the blood rushed to her cheeks. She clicked frantically at her remote, but our presentation continued automatically on a preset timer. The second slide showed a direct quote with accompanying audio. Sandra Walsh, department head. We should avoid hiring women of childbearing age entirely. There's simply too much of a financial liability with maternity leave costs, reduced productivity during pregnancy, and inevitable turnover. Uncomfortable murmurs started rippling through the room like wildfire. Several board members leaned forward in their chairs, their expressions shifting from polite attention to alarmed concern. The third slide displayed a damning email screenshot where Sandra had written to HR, "Continue comprehensive documentation of Jennifer Martinez's minor infractions and performance issues. Her upcoming maternity leave will disrupt team dynamics and client relationships significantly. We need substantial grounds for restructuring her position upon return." Sandra lunged desperately toward the laptop controlling the presentation, but I was ready for exactly that reaction. I stood up calmly from my carefully chosen seat in the back of the room, where I'd been waiting and watching. "I think everyone should hear Sandra's honest thoughts about pregnant employees," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room with perfect clarity. The high-quality audio system played yesterday's recorded conversation in crystal-clear detail, Sandra's voice saying, "And frankly, with your current condition, we need someone who can fully commit to their professional responsibilities without allowing personal distractions to affect their judgment." My recorded response, "You absolutely cannot fire someone for being pregnant. That's explicitly protected under federal employment law." Sandra's voice again, dripping with arrogant confidence. "I'm not firing you for being pregnant. I'm firing you for consistently poor performance and repeated failure to meet departmental standards. All the documentation supporting this decision is right here." Then my voice, barely controlled. "This is completely fabricated bullshit, and you know it. Sandra, caught on tape. It's all thoroughly documented fact. I've been very carefully monitoring your performance for quite some time now." The room absolutely erupted in shocked whispers, angry murmurs, and the sound of people frantically typing on their phones. Board members were having urgent whispered conversations. Mrs. Henderson stood up abruptly and walked toward the exit, her face flushed with obvious anger and disgust. "This presentation is completely unauthorized and illegal," Sandra stammered desperately, her legendary composure finally cracking under pressure. "Someone has criminally hacked our presentation system and is attempting corporate sabotage." I raised my hand calmly and professionally. "I created this presentation using thoroughly documented evidence of systematic discrimination against pregnant employees and mothers in our department over a 5-year period." The CEO himself, Robert Morrison, stepped forward from the front row. His face was grave, his jaw set with barely controlled anger. "Ms. Walsh, is that your voice on these audio recordings?" Sandra looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting around the room looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "These audio clips have been deliberately taken completely out of context and edited maliciously. This is clearly a vindictive attack from a bitter, disgruntled former employee who couldn't handle professional standards." "What possible context makes systematic discrimination against pregnant women acceptable?" asked board member Patricia Collins, her voice sharp with barely contained fury. The presentation continued automatically, displaying slide after slide of devastating evidence. Financial charts showed how the company had lost over $2.8 million in talent acquisition costs, client defections, legal settlements, and recruitment expenses directly related to Sandra's discriminatory practices over 5 years. Detailed timeline graphics showed the pattern. Hire talented woman, promote her initially, begin systematic harassment after pregnancy announcement or life change, document minor infractions, force resignation or termination, repeat process. Jennifer stood up from her seat near the middle of the room. "I'd like to share my personal experience working under Sandra Walsh's supervision." Then Maria stood up from across the room. "I have similar experiences to document." One by one, 7 women throughout the packed conference room stood up. Current employees, former colleagues, even 2 client representatives who had worked directly with women Sandra had systematically destroyed. Each represented a career derailed, a family disrupted, a dream deferred by Sandra's calculated cruelty. "According to our comprehensive financial analysis," I announced clearly, "Morrison & Associates currently faces potential discrimination lawsuits totaling $4.7 million in direct claims. This figure doesn't include the incalculable cost to our professional reputation, client relationships, and future recruitment efforts." Mr. Morrison looked physically ill. I could practically see him calculating how the company's stock price would plummet when this story hit social media and the business press within hours. "Sandra, report to my office immediately," he said in a voice that could cut through steel. "This is nothing but a carefully coordinated witch hunt," Sandra protested desperately, her voice rising to near hysteria. "A group of bitter, unsuccessful women who couldn't handle the demands of professional excellence and accountability." "Ms. Walsh," Patricia Collins interrupted with ice-cold authority, "we've heard more than enough evidence. Security will escort you from the building immediately." As 2 professional security guards approached Sandra from either side, she turned to glare at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "You'll never work in this industry again," she hissed venomously. "I'll make absolutely sure of that." I smiled back calmly, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. I don't think you'll be in any position to make those kinds of threats. Sandra was terminated within 2 hours. The company issued a comprehensive public apology, announced sweeping policy changes including mandatory anti-discrimination training for all management, and established an independent review committee to examine all female employee departures over the past 5 years. They offered me Sandra's exact position with a 45% salary increase, comprehensive maternity benefits, flexible work arrangements, and a formal public apology. But I had completely different plans. That same afternoon, my phone started ringing constantly with job offers. Mrs. Henderson called first. "Jessica, I was incredibly impressed by your presentation today. Your integrity, professional skills, and courage are exactly what Henderson Industries needs. Would you consider joining us as our new Director of Marketing and Client Relations?" The offer was extraordinary: $40,000 more than Sandra's salary, complete remote work flexibility, 6 months paid maternity leave, comprehensive health benefits, and a signing bonus that would cover my mortgage payments for an entire year. By the end of that week, I'd received 12 serious job offers from companies who had witnessed Sandra's public destruction and wanted to hire someone with the proven courage to stand up against systematic discrimination. 6 other women from our department also received multiple offers from employers who specifically wanted to hire people with demonstrated integrity and backbone. Jennifer landed her absolute dream job at a progressive marketing firm that actively promotes work-life balance and has never had a single discrimination complaint in their 15-year history. Maria became VP of Marketing at an innovative startup that provides equity stakes to all employees regardless of gender, family status, or personal circumstances. Lisa started her own successful design consultancy and landed 4 major clients within her first month of operation. Sandra, meanwhile, was fired from her next position within 3 weeks when her new employer discovered the Morrison incident through a simple Google search. Word travels incredibly fast in our interconnected industry, especially when it involves federal discrimination violations and viral social media coverage. The Department of Labor launched a comprehensive investigation into Morrison & Associates' historical employment practices. The EEOC filed formal discrimination charges. My journalist friend Sarah published a detailed exposé that went viral across social media platforms and prompted congressional hearings on pregnancy discrimination in corporate America. Sandra became the national poster child for everything wrong with workplace discrimination against women. Her LinkedIn profile disappeared completely. Her professional associations revoked her memberships. She couldn't get hired as a junior marketing coordinator at companies where she'd once been seriously considered for senior executive positions. Within 6 months, I heard through industry contacts that she was working retail at a department store, completely blacklisted from marketing and unable to find any professional employment. 3 months after the presentation, I was settled into my beautiful home office, 6 months pregnant and leading my new company's most successful product launch in their 20-year history. My morning sickness had finally passed completely, and I was thriving in an environment that valued my contributions, rather than viewing my pregnancy as a liability to be managed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Guess who I saw working as a cashier at Target yesterday? Karma is absolutely beautiful sometimes." But the best part wasn't Sandra's complete professional destruction, though that was deeply satisfying. The best part was knowing that my daughter would grow up in a world where women like me don't stay silent when faced with systematic injustice. She'll know that sometimes fighting back isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting every woman who comes after you. Morrison and Associates implemented the strongest anti-discrimination policies in their entire industry. They hired a chief diversity officer with real authority, established a $2 million fund for women's professional development, and became a widely recognized model for how companies should treat pregnant employees and working mothers. My story was featured in Harvard Business Review as a detailed case study in effective whistleblowing strategies. I was invited to speak at conferences about workplace discrimination. The presentation that completely destroyed Sandra's career became a template that other women successfully used to expose discrimination at their own companies across the country. But the most important victory happened 9 months later when I gave birth to my perfectly healthy daughter, Emma Rose. I was holding her in my hospital room, exhausted but euphoric, when David showed me the latest news. Sandra had been arrested for falsifying employment records at her retail job, a desperate attempt to hide her discrimination history that backfired spectacularly and resulted in criminal charges. "She's going to grow up knowing her mom is a fighter who never backs down," David said softly, kissing Emma's tiny forehead with infinite tenderness. Sandra thought pregnancy made me vulnerable and easy to eliminate. Instead, it made me fierce enough to take down a systematic predator who had been destroying women's careers for years without consequences. My daughter will never know a world where pregnancy discrimination goes unchallenged or unpunished. Every time Emma kicks during my stories about standing up to workplace bullies, I'm convinced she approves of her mom's choices and fighting spirit. Sandra Walsh learned far too late that underestimating a pregnant woman's determination intelligence, and capacity for strategic revenge is the biggest mistake any workplace predator can possibly make. The last I heard, she was still working retail and living in a studio apartment, completely unable to rebuild her professional reputation. Meanwhile, I'm raising my daughter in the house we almost lost, working for a company that values integrity, and speaking at conferences about fighting discrimination. Sometimes justice takes time, but it's always worth the wait.